Thank you so much for coming. This talk is usually an hour long, so I'm going to try to get it down into 30 minutes as best I can. I have two quick caveats before I begin. First and foremost, I am feeling quite well. I am not sick. I am not injured in any way. I happen to be Italian from New York. That's why my voice sounds the way it does. I cannot do anything about it. I am trying. So bear with me. Number two, my day job is being a psychedelic witch. I write about the occult and witchcraft and psychedelics, give guided journeys, and that's why I get to dress like an asshole. So, Psychedelic Witch, demonizing the entheogenic sacred feminine. In order to understand how this happened, how these entheogenic ointments of your common shamanesses, witches, magical practitioners, became this diabolical ointment called the witch's ointment, I have to briefly go over two trends in ecclesiastical literary history, or this entire talk is not going to make any sense. The witch's ointment formed in ecclesiastical literature, and that's where we are going to find it, should we seek it. The first is called the INTERPRETATIO ROMANA. The INTERPRETATIO ROMANA was a way for theologians to rewrite, reimagine, sort of really just romanticize in the ways of old Rome. A good way to think about the Interpretatio Romana, medieval mansplaining. That's what it is. So these guys that were writing these texts had been locked up, not locked up, but they had lived most of their lives in monasteries and had the books, libraries, all that available to them, but had very little contact with the outside world until they went out to preach and start their missions. So they tended to reimagine and rewrite folk traditions in ways of ancient Roman understandings of paganism. So for example, all throughout Western Europe, there were these different kinds of night goers, for lack of a better word. In Italy, there was the bonares, or those who walk well or do good. They would go, there was a group of spirits that would go from city to city, town to town, house to house, and bless houses that were clean, and ransack houses that were even a little bit messy. If anyone here, if you were younger, were ever told by your parents to clean your room, or if you're a parent, you ever yelled at your kid to clean their room, you may not realize it, but that is cultural residue from a time in our history when it was believed spirits would destroy your house if it was not clean. Other they were reimagined in the text as sometimes they're witches disguised as demons, other times demons disguised as witches, depending on the author. Other creatures like the Silwan, which are these forest nymphs, sprites, fairies, elves, they were reimagined as incubi and succubi. Now, incubi, or incubus in the singular, is not just the name of a band that used to be good and now sucks. It's also the name of a hypersexual demon that would sneak into your house at night and defile you in your sleep. The succubus or succubi in the plural being the feminine, female equivalent. Different kinds of medical spirits. These women were healers, and they would often call upon spirits to help in their operations. They were rewritten as demons. Now, most importantly for this talk, fertility goddess worship of all kinds was rewritten as worship of the ancient pagan huntress goddess Diana. Now, this was a term of convenience, Diana, because this fertility goddess worship was one of the most difficult pagan beliefs to stamp out of Christian Europe. It was so widespread that this divine mother went by many names, even in the same countries. For example, in Milano, where I used to live to start researching this book, she went by the name Madame Oriente, the Lady of the East. In southern Italy, in some parts, she was Epiphania. In the Wasser Valley, she was Richella, the mother of riches and good fortune. Over in France, she was Satia, she who satisfies, or sates. In Germany, in certain parts, she was Holda, Frau Holt, Frau Helt. In other parts, she was Hera, Berta, Perkta. So Diana served as a linguistic placeholder because Antonio in Italy wants to write to Wolfgang in Germany, knows that Wolfgang has no idea what the name Epiphania is or what that means. So he wants to just get across that there are still these women, and men for that matter, worshiping this divine mother, so he just puts Diana, so Wolfgang gets the letter. Oh, those fertility goddess worshippers. The original text where we see this first is in the Canon Episcopi, written by Regina of Prum under orders of Rathbod of Trier in 906 of the Common Era. Am I going too fast? Okay, sorry. And this was a list of all these different superstitions that Rathbod wanted stomped out of the backwoods of Germany. And within that battery of offenses, we find, and one should not ignore those certain wicked women who, seduced by the fantastic illusions of demons, believe that they ride at night with certain beasts alongside the pagan goddess Diana. Again, it's a linguistic placeholder. It's easier than saying the pagan goddess known as Epiphania, Bertha, Perchta, Holda, Satya. That covered the whole thing. I don't know what the next slide is, so we're all going to find out together. Good. We are on to our second trend in ecclesiastical literary history, that of the crystallization of the stereotypical witch. The stereotypical witch is specifically a woman. Although men, like I said, did practice these arts, the stereotype specifically focuses on women. The stereotypical witch flies through the air on a broom covered in an ointment that is made out of the flesh and blood of murdered children. Where is she flying to? Well, the Sabbat, which is this demonic congregation overseen by the devil who was a raver in the 90s and never lost his glow sticks. While at the Sabbat, the witch will renounce Christianity. She will do this by having a large wooden cross placed at her feet, and she will defecate on it and piss on it and step on it. Hopefully not in that order. Hopefully she steps on it first, but whatever, it's a party. She wouldn't just renounce Christianity, she would also sell her soul to the devil. While there, she would learn maleficia, which is evil or harmful magic. Things like raising storms to destroy crops, making pregnant women miscarry, making men impotent, anything that an agrarian society would really care about, magic that worked against that was maleficia. The stereotypical witch was also a cannibal. After learning magic, or maleficious more specifically, she would sit down to a feast of murdered children and drink chalices overflowing with their blood. Finally, she would copulate with demons. Now, let me say that this is a stereotype. This is invented by the clergy. Nobody ever actually did this. But it is the stereotype of the stereotypical witch, a woman who flies through the air, renounces Christianity, worships the devil, learns magic, drinks blood, and fornicates with demons. I once threw a party, and it was actually pretty much the same thing. So this is what it looks like on a timeline. History doesn't normally work on timelines, but it'll help here. So when the Canon Episcopi first came out, I should have said before, I forgot, Regina of Prum was skeptical about it. He wasn't saying that these women were actually doing this. He was saying it was illegal to believe that you could. So no one thought anything was happening with that. However, come the late 1300s, early 1400s, the canon starts to be viewed as a real event, mostly due to the calamities of that time, bubonic plague, famine, war, those things. If it's a loving God, why does life suck? There must be witches bringing the devil into reality. Okay. Now, by 1486, we have one of the most famous tracts ever produced, the Malleus Maleficarum, and in it, the authors say that the broom, the ointment used, is made of the flesh and blood of murdered children. Now, that is total bullshit. And I wanted to know what was really in these ointments. Now, the problem with the Malleus is that, as you can see, it's written after the stereotype is in place. So it's bringing all the stereotypical elements into it. So I wondered, are there any earlier records that might have escaped the Interpretatio Romana, maybe even were written before the crystallization of the witch stereotype? So it turns out there are. I'm going to go over 3 of them now that show essentially how this happened, how the entheogenic flying ointments of these wise women, these shamanesses, were fed through the literary machinery of the Interpretatio Romana and spit out the other end of history as the newest addition to the stereotypical witch, the stereotypical witch's ointment. First up is this man here, Johannes Nider. Johannes Nider was oh my God, what was he? well, certainly a theologian. He was also a professor at the University of Austria. He dealt with heretics, but he wasn't so much a heretic hunter as he was a heretic negotiator. He was in fact very reasonable for his time, and nothing at all like other fanatical inquisitors, like Conrad of Marburg, who famously said, "I would burn 100 to find the guilty one." Those guys existed. Nider was not one of them, and it is not nice or historically polite to lump him into that milieu. Of course, he had his biases. In fact, in this treatise he's holding right here, the Formicarius, unfortunately I won't have time to discuss, but I do want to say real quick, there's a chapter in there on the superiority of women and how virtuous they truly are, and another chapter on folk magic that he thought was perfectly acceptable, and that other church leaders should just leave these people alone. But as I said, he did have his biases, and while he was traveling around as a preacher, he put together an anthology of his sermons. Now, sermon is from the Latin sermo, which means report. So when we read these, they're really cool. You're not reading things like a preacher yelling fire and brimstone at a congregation. You're reading news reports. This is how people got their information. And they're a treasure trove of knowing what regular people were doing. In one of Nider's sermons, he talks about a woman called Nun Holden. Now, like I said before, that's a fertility goddess worshiper that he's referring to. She is a worshiper of Holda, the same way a Christian follows Christ, a Buddhist follows Buddha. And he says that she has this rather strange practice about believing that she could fly through the air. And he asks her, well, how is this actually done? And when I finally found this next line, I was so excited. Let's all read together. No, I'm kidding. This is Old High German, and what it says is these kinds of women are known as the Unholda. They cause much trouble in their community, and then he said something so important I had to highlight it in yellow. And through the salves that they make, they are able to go. Now, where are they going? Well, they're going to the Heuberg, which is this supernatural mountaintop where people would go to worship the gods of old. They would be populated by mythical creatures, pans playing pan flutes, just like this bacchanalian revelry. But it was in the mind. And he says that her way of getting there was to rub this ointment over her body while singing magical words. But then he laughs at her and says, you know, she was so deluded, she didn't fly away. She was actually knocked out cold, so strong were the narcotics in these ointments. Now, what we notice about this account is that it is not colored by the witch stereotype whatsoever. There is no Satan, there are no demons, there's no children's flesh. It's clear that this is a soporific ointment that has made this woman fall into a deep sleep so that she could traverse the dream realm to get to the Heuberg. So it would make sense that it was published in 1430 or thereabouts. It escaped the witch stereotype because it didn't even exist yet. And it escaped the Interpretatio Romana because Nider was talking to a congregation. They wouldn't have known who Diana was. There was nothing to toy with. He's just giving a sermon about things that are going on, like in your neighborhood, like this is what's going on. So we're getting these ointments in a clearer form. The next gentleman I'd like to discuss is this man here, Alonso Tostado. He was the Bishop of Avila, Spain. And in fact, today, how does it go? There's still a saying in Spain, it's something like más escribir que el Tostado or something, which is a challenge for writers to write as much as Tostado can write. Importantly for our purposes, he was a biblical literalist, meaning he took the stories in the Bible to be true, not based on faith, but based on reason and a very crude form of what we would call scientific method. So these books are also, they're very interesting to read. So anyway, one of his first commentaries was a commentary on the book of Genesis. And he gets to that point where God, or I guess Yahweh in this case, pulls the rib from Adam to create Eve without causing Adam any pain, right? Do we know this story? No? Okay, cool. So this really bothered his biblical literalist mind. Could Yahweh really put Adam into such a deep sleep that he would feel nothing while Yahweh got into this, sort of cosmic surgery? So he puts his quill down, takes a little bit of wine, and paces, and he thinks about it. And then finally, it hits him. A light bulb, well, I guess not a light bulb, a candle goes off over his head. He runs back to his desk, grabs his quill, shoves it into the inkwell, and writes. Writes. Some of these ointments are the kinds that doctors use when they want to operate. We know, too, that this kind of anointing causes such mental disassociation that for a short while a person will become separate from the self and feel no sensation. Oh, so that's how Yahweh did it. He just used one of those medical ointments. That made the miracle now possible in the realm of natural science. Now, this would have been the end of the story had Tostado not furnished us with one minor but crucial detail. And by the way, there are certain women, we, meaning theologians, call them witches, who admit to using these same ointments along with certain ritual chants to imagine that they are transported wherever they wish to diverse places where they meet with other women and men. There they enjoy and indulge in food and all sorts of pleasures. There's no getting around it. He is describing a psychedelic experience. You will have noticed again, there is no Satan here. There's no demonology of any kind. In fact, Tostado was not even trying to prove any of this. This is bolstering his argument just to say, yeah, Yahweh could pull a rib from Adam by using one of these medical ointments. So that's gold to a historian because he didn't care about this. He cared about proving Genesis right. It would make sense, of course, that the commentary on Genesis was published in 1435. It misses the Interpretatio Romana, again, because he wasn't writing something to explain folk beliefs to his colleagues. He was writing a commentary on a biblical verse. It escaped the crystallization of the witch stereotype because it didn't even exist yet. But as I said, he was a rather prolific author and ended up writing another commentary, this one on the Gospel of Matthew. And he gets to that famous part in Matthew chapter 4, verses 1 through 11, where Satan tempts Jesus in the desert after spending 40 days and nights in the desert. Anybody not know this story as well? That one? No? Yes? All right. Spoiler alert, Jesus does not give in to the devil. I'll get him next time. So the devil tempts Jesus by showing him all the wood, says, all this can be yours. Jesus says no. Flies him to the pinnacle of the temple, says, forget just, this city, everything you could see could be yours if you'll just worship me. Jesus says no. The devil disappears. It's a happy ending. Except for that crucifixion part. That's rather painful, but I hear he's planning a sequel. He's coming back. Anyway, this again bothered the mind of Alonso Tostado. Could the devil really fly people through the air? Not just anyone, he's talking about Jesus, the Son of God, right? So he puts his quill down, he takes some wine, gets a little more wine, and he paces. And it hits him again. He's going to rest his argument in the natural sciences, specifically drugs. And he writes for us, a person who believes such things, meaning transvection or to fly, belongs to the devil. They believe Diana is a goddess, and yet Diana is the devil. Interpretatio Romana feeding right into the witch stereotype. You're watching it happen before your eyes. It should not be denied that female and also male sorcerers with certain kinds of wicked rituals and ointments are carried away by demons. They revere the demons by indulging in lust and all indecencies. Does anybody detect maybe a small change of tone between these two commentaries? Well, perhaps that's because Matthew, or the commentary, was published in 1440, just as the Interpretatio Romana was feeding into the crystallization of the witch stereotype. Demonizing the entheogenic sacred feminine. In 1430, Johannes Nider says that medical drugs are what is used to carry people to the Chuberg or their spirit dances or their witch dances to worship the pagan gods. 1435, Alonso Tostado says, absolutely, these are medical drugs. By 1486, Kramer and Spranger have now said that it's just baby flesh and blood in the ointments, because this is now after the stereotype. Unfortunately, it coincided with the printing press and became one of the most widely read witch and demonology tracts. Thereby, by 1500 to 1650, popularly called the Burning Times, baby flesh as ointments become standardized in demon theory. Now, what's interesting about this is that Sprenger and Kramer cite Johannes Nider as one of their sources. They knew exactly what was going on and chose to write the ointments out. And I'm going to end with a quote from a man named Jean Vincent to show one final kind of nail in the coffin. From 1475. Poison witches mix poisonous ingredients into love philters and ointments which disturb people's minds, transform their bodies, but usually serve only to kill the user. They claim to be transported far away at night to demonic sabbats by the influence of these same drugs. The correct deduction, however, is that not one of these things should be attributed to any natural power belonging to such drugs, but rather to the cunning of a demon. The demon is the true operative cause. These kinds of drugs are the secondary cause, because without Satan there was no, it was just a psychedelic experience. That's how they did it in a half hour or less. Thank you.